So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Prelims Powerplay. In this lecture series, we cover past 1 year's important news items, important current affairs, important topics. And we have segregated those topics subject-wise so that it becomes easier for you to cover each and every subject. Now, as you guys all know by now, if you have been following this lecture series for quite some time, that we have started with economic section, right? So we are going to be covering all the important topics that have a very high chance of featuring in your prelims examination through this lecture series. Okay, we will cover all the important news items that have a very high chance of featuring in your examination through this lecture series. Okay, I've repeated myself, but I wanted to put across this point. All right. Now, some of you have commented and some of you have also messaged me that, sir, please make the schedule of this entire Prelims Powerplay lecture series public. So let me assure you, I also know that the schedule is very important for you guys so that you can plan your preparation accordingly. Prelims is just around the corner. It's not that far. So I also understand the need for planning, the need for schedule. So I'm going to make the schedule for this entire Prelims Powerplay series public tomorrow or most probably day after tomorrow so that you can basically plan your preparation, revision, current affairs preparation accordingly. Okay? All right. Then let's just quickly dive into the lecture because as I mention this every time I begin this lecture, the time is of the essence. Time is very important and you need to save time. Okay, so we will quickly finish this lecture, but to do that, we need to quickly dive into this lecture. We need to quickly start this lecture. So let's quickly start this lecture. Okay, so let's start with Prelims Powerplay economic section. And as you guys all know, that the entire economic section has been divided into these 7 topics. So far, through our previous 4 lectures, we have covered economic growth and development and banking and finance. Today, we are going to start with fiscal policy, basically government policy. Okay. Now, within fiscal policy, basically, there were so many news items. Okay. But I have shortlisted the most important ones. Okay. So within fiscal policy, we are going to be covering these 6 topics. These are the 6 topics that are of extreme importance. You cannot ignore them at all. Okay. Number 1 topic is RBI's Quality of Government Expenditure Index. Okay, we'll cover this. Then there was this article in the Indian Express Explained section which talked about, are Indians overtaxed? Because just before the budget, there is this noise that Government of India needs to reduce taxes. So the pertinent question is, are Indians overtaxed? Is taxation system in India too burdensome as compared to other countries? So we will find out through this discussion. Then government has decided to discontinue with sovereign gold bond scheme. So what is sovereign gold bond scheme? We'll talk about this. Then government also decided to discontinue a particular form of tax called windfall tax on oil production, which was basically levied 33 months before, like 3 years before. Okay. So what was this windfall tax on oil production? We'll talk about this and why has the government decided to discontinue it. Okay. Then we'll talk about loan from National Savings Fund. Okay. Because recently, just before the Delhi elections, there was this controversy between Government of India and Delhi government with respect to loans from National Savings Fund. And in the end, we'll talk about a particular form of tax. Okay. Long-term capital gain tax. And how long-term capital gain tax can be inflation indexed. Okay. You will understand what do I mean by inflation index when we will discuss this topic. Clear? Simple? So let's begin today's discussion, starting with Quality of Government Expenditure Index. So topic number 1, Quality of Government Expenditure Index. All right. Now, Quality of Government Expenditure, as the name suggests, talks about government expenditure. Now, government incurs expenditure of all sorts. Okay, government pays salaries, government gives you subsidies, government builds roads, bridges, government builds schools, hospitals. There is a huge variety of types of expenditure as far as the government is concerned. But some form of expenditure by the government is considered superior and some form is considered inferior. Now, what is this superior form of expenditure and what is this inferior form of expenditure? We'll talk about this. Another thing is that government expenditure is important for us, or the quality of government expenditure is important for us, taxpayers. This information is important for us. Why? Because the entire expenditure incurred by the government is basically indirectly done by us. Because where else will the government get its money from? The government is getting its money from us taxpayers, and government is using that money for various expenditure, right? So we have a right to know what kind of expenditure the government is incurring, right? Because it's, after all, it's our money. Clear? Simple. Now the thing is, government incurs expenditure, right? Now government also earns money. The money earned by government is called government receipts, and the expenditure incurred by the government is government expenditure. Most of the times, government expenditure exceeds government receipts. Okay? Expenditure of government is more than government receipts. So the money that is coming to the government is less than the money out of the pockets of the government, right? Now, if government is spending more, way more than it's earning, then how else, or how is the government basically compensating for this difference? Okay, if government is spending 200 rupees and is earning just 150 rupees, then where is the government getting this 50 rupees from? Government is borrowing that money. Okay, government is actually borrowing that money. Simple. Now that is known as fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is the amount by which government's expenditures exceed receipts. Now, if government is borrowing too much, then government's debt is increasing. And if government's debt is increasing, then in future government has to pay off that debt. Now, how will government pay off that debt? In future, government will have to raise taxes to pay off that debt, right? So government might not increase taxes now, and government can fulfill its expenditure requirements by borrowing, right? But in future, government will have to those borrowings, and for that government will raise taxes. That would be a burden on us again. So we also have the right to know how much fiscal deficit is the government running, or how much debt is there on the government, right? All of this is a part of quality of public expenditure, right? So let's talk about this index that is released by RBI, Quality of Government Expenditure Index. Okay, now like I've mentioned before, government incurs some expenditure and government earns money through receipts. Now expenditure is more than receipts. Okay, so the difference between expenditure and receipts is fiscal deficit, and this deficit is fulfilled through borrowings. Okay, now government has a natural tendency to spend more, and if government wants to win elections, it won't tax the people that much, right? In democratic setups, government hesitates to tax people because it knows that it might lose votes because of that. Therefore, in democratic setups, expenditure requirements are very high. Receipts are generally low. Government has this natural tendency to incur fiscal deficit in democratic setups. Okay, if government wants to win votes, it will have to increase welfare spending, and it will have to lower taxes. That increases your fiscal deficit, and that increases your borrowings. But the fundamental flaw with borrowings is that if you borrow now, you will have to pay back those borrowings in future. And that would create problems, because then those borrowings would have to be paid back by increasing taxes, right? So government will put burden on future taxpayers. Therefore, government has to control its fiscal deficits, its borrowings. All right. But like I mentioned before, governments have this natural tendency to spend more. They have this natural tendency to spend more. They have this natural tendency to increase its fiscal deficit. They have this tendency. Okay. So we have to control government to not follow its natural tendency. So how do we do that? Well, in India, Parliament of India enacted a law which ensures that government is disciplined. It does not let its fiscal deficit out of control. Okay? So Parliament of India passed a law, and now it's a legal obligation for the government to maintain fiscal discipline. Fiscal discipline means keeping your fiscal deficit in control, because you cannot let borrowings get out of control. You cannot let debt out of control. Okay. Now, that law to ensure fiscal discipline is called FRBM Act of 2003. Now, what is FRBM Act? The full form is, many of you know this, Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act. Now, there are some key features of this law, though this law is way more detailed, but I'm just going to tell you about some of its key features, because after all, our topic is quality of public expenditure. So we in that lane. Okay. Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act. Now, it says that under this law, fiscal deficit should never be, okay, it should always be less than equal to 3% of GDP. Okay. So that means you have to control your expenditures to such an extent that your fiscal deficit is always within this limit. Okay. Now, expenditures, you will understand that in the budget series, expenditures are of two types: revenue expenditure, capital expenditure. Okay. In fact, I'll explain it in a better way. Okay. In fact, the entire budget of Government of India is divided into two parts: revenue, capital. Revenue account, capital account. Now, revenue account has some receipts, it has some expenditure. Capital account has some receipts, capital account has some expenditure, right? Now, fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus total receipts. Okay, that is fiscal deficit, and it shouldn't be more than 3% of your GDP. Now, FRBM Act also says that your revenue deficit, okay, there is one thing called deficit, which is for the entire budget, then revenue deficit, which is deficit in the revenue account. Revenue deficit is equal to revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. FRBM Act says that revenue deficit should be round about 0, which means that if you are running fiscal deficit of 3% of GDP, that means your borrowings for that year is 3% of GDP. Your 3% of GDP borrowings should not be channelized towards revenue expenditure, because revenue deficit should be 0. Entire revenue expenditure should be financed by revenue receipts. But you are running fiscal deficit. So these borrowings, this 3% of GDP, will be utilized to finance capital expenditure, because entire revenue expenditure should be financed by revenue receipts. So your borrowings should be financed, or your borrowings should finance capital expenditure, because they say capital expenditure is superior to revenue expenditure. Okay. Now, it is very difficult to follow FRBM Act. Rarely, no government has so far completely followed FRBM Act. Yet, the targets set by FRBM Act are: fiscal deficit should not exceed 3% of GDP. Revenue deficit should be 0. So, all the borrowings should be to finance CAPEX. CAPEX is short form for capital expenditure. Now, what all is included in revenue expenditure, capital expenditure? Okay. So, revenue expenditure means interest payments, salaries and pensions, subsidies, defense expenditure, grants given by central government, expenditure on social, economic and general services. Whereas capital expenditure is expenditure on building infrastructure, roads, bridges, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure like UPI, Aadhaar and all. repayment of past loans, giving new loans, establishing new companies. Government also has companies, PSUs. So all of this is capital expenditure. Now, economists say that revenue expenditure is wasteful expenditure, whereas capital expenditure is gainful expenditure. And why is that? They say that if you increase your capital expenditure by building more roads, bridges, you will earn a lot of money in future. Your GDP will increase. But by paying money to subsidies, freebies, salaries and pensions, that won't give you any form of gain in future. Therefore, revenue expenditure should be totally financed by revenue receipts. And if you have to borrow, then borrow for capital expenditure because this is gainful expenditure. This rule that borrowing should only finance capital expenditure is also known as golden rule of public finance. Okay, right? So that is why FRBM Act says revenue deficit should be 0, fiscal deficit should be 3%, borrowing should only be for capex. Some more important information with respect to FRBM Act. Now, earlier it was that the target under FRBM Act was that fiscal deficit should be under 3%, right? But now Government of India from 2026-27 says that instead of primarily targeting fiscal deficit, we will directly target debt to GDP ratio. Okay, so this will be our primary target. Fiscal deficit and revenue deficit would be our secondary targets. Okay, this shift will happen from 26-27. India aims to reduce its central government debt to GDP ratio by 50% by March 31st, 2031. This is some extra information you'll find in your notes also. Okay, so you understand what is this golden rule? Okay, golden rule is that public expenditure, government expenditure should be basically, government expenditure includes all types of expenditure, revenue, capital. But if you are borrowing money, then that money should be channelized towards capital expenditure. And they say that your government expenditure is of high quality if your revenue expenditure is low and capital expenditure is high, because capital expenditure is growth boosting, whereas revenue expenditure is wasteful. You have to do it, okay, but it's wasteful. All right. Now, RBI measures the quality of public expenditure, government expenditure through an index called Quality of Public Expenditure or Quality of Government Expenditure Index. Okay, this is something that RBI has been measuring since 1991. Now, as I've mentioned before, your expenditure will be of high quality if it is more capital, development oriented, and not subsidies and salaries, right? So under Quality of Government Expenditure Index, RBI measures 5 indicators. Okay, capital expenditure to GDP ratio, that means in expenditure on infrastructure. Revenue expenditure to capital expenditure ratio. So if this ratio is high, capital outlay to GDP ratio, then high quality. Revenue expenditure to capital outlay ratio, that means how much is your revenue expenditure as compared to capital outlay. If this is high, bad quality. Okay. Development expenditure to GDP ratio, if this is high, good quality. Okay. Bad quality is downward arrow. Development expenditure as a percentage of total government expenditure. So as a percentage of not GDP, total government expenditure, what is the percentage of development expenditure? If this is high, good quality. Interest payments to total government expenditure. How much of your expenditure is being used to pay off earlier loans? That is interest payments to government expenditure. If this is high, bad quality. So taking a look at all these indicators, RBI releases Quality of Public Expenditure or Government Expenditure Index. Now, as per the recent data from this index, it has been found that quality of government expenditure has been improving. But if we were to analyze the data from 1991 onwards, then these two charts give us a very good idea. Okay, this first chart is that of quality of public expenditure of central government, quality of public expenditure of state government. So as you can see, from 1991, because of economic reforms, quality increased. Okay, that is the case with state governments as well. Then quality declined. That is because of fifth pay commission, salaries burden increased. Then after some time, things improved, quality increased. Okay, then it declined, and that is because of some banking sector crisis, and that is also because government's fiscal deficit increased. And the reason for increase in fiscal deficit of central government, as you can see, central government's quality declined, not of states. The reason for that was that because of 14th Finance Commission, central government had to give a lot of money to state governments. So state government's revenue improved, but central government's declined. Okay. And from 2021 onwards, after lockdown, our expenditure quality is increasing. Okay. This is just to give you a brief idea. These charts are not that important. Okay. But just to give you a brief idea. All right. So I hope you understood the basics, because any MCQ that might be constructed from this topic would target your basics. You should know about the golden rule. You should know about fiscal deficit discipline. You should know about quality of public expenditure index and its 5 indicators. You should remember these 5 indicators by heart, because an MCQ might be constructed out of it. All right? Okay. Now let's move on to one more thing before we move on to topic number 2. So as per the recent report by RBI, okay, quality of public expenditure index, these were a few highlights. First of all, revenue deficit is still there. It is not zero. So RBI has highlighted that. Overall quality has increased, but there is a new culture of freebies and subsidies, especially in state governments. And we all know about it. This is the most talked about point in the news also. Culture of giving freebies. Elections are fought on it. Then there are some inefficient spending, leakages, corruption. Then debt burden has increased. And there are state disparities. Some states are doing well, some states aren't. So these are the challenges highlighted by the recent RBI report. Okay, that's it. So go through this all. Now the next topic is, are Indians overtaxed? That means that do we tax our population way more than other countries? Now, why is this topic being discussed? Well, this article published just before the presentation of the budget. And the reason was, recent times, India's economy's growth rate has slowed down a little bit. And there is a particular reason behind that. They say that this slowdown is happening because of decline in consumer spending. Now, what do we mean by consumer spending? Well, consumer spending is when you and me, people like you and me, spend money on goods and services. We go out in the market and buy stuff, right? Now, when this consumer spending is down, it is bad for the economy. And why is it bad for the economy? Well, we people, by buying goods and services, actually boost the economy. Because by buying goods and services, we register our demand. Because when we buy goods and services, the factory producers get the idea that there is high demand for these goods and services, so they start to produce more. So more amount of goods and services, more value of goods and services are being produced in the economy, and that increases GDP. Because after all, what is GDP? Total value of goods and services produced in an economy in 1 year. So if we are buying more goods and services, then producers are producing more goods and services, and that increases our GDP. But if our consumption levels are down, our consumer spending is down, well, then that is not a good signal for growth rate, GDP growth rate. Now, an idea has been proposed, okay, or was being proposed back in the day. It is still being proposed though, but back in the day, just before the presentation of the budget, it was being proposed that we need to reduce taxes on Indians. Because if we'll reduce taxes on Indians, Indians would be left with more money to spend. And when they'll have more money to spend because of reduction in taxation burden, then they will spend more, consumer spending will increase, aggregate demand would increase, GDP would increase. Okay, so if we really want to fire up GDP growth rate in India, then we need to basically reduce taxation burden on people. Now, because this idea was proposed, well, a debate started. And that debate was, Is India taxing its population way more than other countries? Are Indians being overtaxed? Right? And this debate was being answered through this article. And this article is important because a question or MCQ might be constructed out of it. And that is why I have included this in our Prelims Powerplay series. Okay, so let's talk about, are Indians overtaxed? Now look, GDP of any country is basically driven by four factors. Okay, basically GDP of any country is equal to total consumer spending, total private investment, total government spending, and net exports. Net exports, X over here means exports, M over here means imports. Okay, so GDP of any country is equal to these things. Okay, now these four categories are known as drivers of economic growth. Drivers of economic growth. They drive your economy, GDP growth rate. Okay, if you increase consumer spending, well, then what will happen? GDP will increase. If you increase investment, private investment, GDP would increase. If government increases its expenditure, government starts to build more roads, bridges, buys more goods and services, GDP will increase. And if you export more, if your exports increase vis-a-vis your imports, then your GDP is driven forward. Okay, so these four categories: consumption, which is equal to total consumer spending in 1 year, investment, government expenditure, and exports. These are the four drivers of economic growth. Now, in recent times, India's GDP growth rate has slowed down. And what is the reason behind it? The reason is that these four drivers have slowed down. Okay, let's talk about that. Growth crisis in India. There were four drivers. Okay, so number one driver has slowed down in consumption expenditure. Clear? Then, because are not spending more on goods and services, people are not spending that much on goods and services. Because of that, private investors are also not investing that much money. Okay, after all, what is private investment? Let's suppose I'm a factory owner. Okay, if I'm a factory owner, then let's suppose I decide to open another factory. In that another factory, I will buy machines, tools, plant, machinery, all of that. That counts as investment. Okay, but if people are not buying enough goods and services, okay, that means my existing factory is not able to sell all its goods and services. So why would I open another factory? So private investment levels are also down. So C is down. Private investment levels are down. The word over here, capacity utilization, what it means is, capacity utilization means that I am utilizing my factory's full capacity. If my factory full capacity is 70%, then that means that the demand for my goods and services from my factory is only enough so that I have to use only 70% of my factory's capacity, which is 100%. That means demand for my factory's goods and services is very high. So capacity utilization is low, private investment is low, investment levels are down. Then the thing is, government expenditure is somehow maintaining growth. But there is limit to government expenditure. Just a while back, when we were discussing quality of public expenditure, I told you that there is a limit to government expenditure. Government has to limit its fiscal deficit. Government has to inculcate fiscal discipline. Government cannot increase its expenditure to unlimited levels. There is a limit. So there is a limit to which government expenditure can drive your GDP growth. And that limit is FRBM Act, fiscal discipline. So you cannot completely rely on this. Now one driver is left, and that is exports. But because of Donald Trump and rising protectionism, rising tariff wars, well, global trade has slowed down. And when global trade slows down, well, exports also slow down. So there is no hope from export driven growth. There is no growth from export driven growth. There is no hope from government expenditure driven growth, and private investment depends on consumer spending. So there is only one hope, that we somehow increase consumer spending. And one way to do that is, well, reduce taxes. Yes, because it is being argued that now the onus is on Indian consumers. Only Indian consumers can lift this slowdown or lift Indian economy from this phase of slowdown. Okay. Unless people start spending more, it is not possible to reach 7 to 8% growth rate on a consistent basis. So now is the time for government to cut taxes. And that is why there is this debate that are Indians being overtaxed? If Indians are being overtaxed, then now is the time to reduce those taxes. Okay. But if Indians are already being undertaxed, then there is no point in reducing taxes further. Then we have to find another solution. So if Indians are overtaxed, there is scope for reducing taxes. But if Indians are already undertaxed as compared to other countries of the world, then we shouldn't reduce taxes further. Okay? Because already government is having very little resources. Okay? Make sense? So now, how do we find out that are Indians being overtaxed? We have to compare taxation levels in India with other countries. Yes, that's what we have to do. Okay? So there are 5 charts. Okay, the data came from IMF, World Bank. Okay, so IMF, World Bank released these 5 charts, and based on the analysis of these 5 charts, we get an idea about India's taxation levels and the rest of the world's taxation levels. Okay, so we'll take a look at all these charts one by one. Let's look at chart number 1. Okay, chart number 1 basically, let me change the color of this. Yeah. So chart number 1 is share of central government expenditure funded by taxes. Okay. How much of government of India's total expenditure is financed by taxes? Okay. So the green over here is Denmark. This turquoise-ish is Sweden. And then there is India. This line is India. So as you can see, round about 80% of total government expenditure is financed from taxes. So we are heavily dependent on taxes as compared to the rest of the world. Okay, except Denmark and Sweden, all the other countries and Israel also. No, Denmark and Sweden. All the other countries don't rely that much on taxes. They have other revenue sources as well. China, US, Brazil, Mexico, they have other resources as well. But we are heavily reliant on taxes. Our total expenditure, government's expenditure is heavily reliant on taxes. So if we will reduce taxes, then government's expenditure is going to suffer. So government cannot afford to reduce taxes because it is heavily reliant on taxes. Okay. So this is chart number 1, which talks about central government's reliance on taxes. Central government expenditures reliance on taxes. Let's go to chart number 2, which is tax revenue as a percentage of GDP or as a share of GDP. Here we find that India is very low. This chart is talking about tax to GDP ratio. So if you look at tax to GDP ratio as a percentage of India's GDP, India collects very little taxes. So if we look at this chart, well, somehow we can say that we are undertaxed. Because most other countries, in fact, not just developed countries, you can look at Chile, China, South Africa, Brazil, they earn more taxes as a share of their GDP than India. The countries that are behind India are Democratic Republic of Congo, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia doesn't tax its population because it earns a lot out of selling oil. So it doesn't need to tax its population that much. Okay. So this chart says that we are undertaxed. We don't collect that much tax as a percentage of our GDP. If we look at GDP. Okay. Now let's go to third chart. Tax revenue as a share of GDP versus GDP per capita. Now, let's not just look at GDP alone. Let's talk about GDP per capita. And what is GDP per capita? Total GDP divided by population. Okay. And when we look at or when we adjust this tax to GDP ratio with GDP per capita, India's GDP per capita is very low, by the way. When we adjust our tax to GDP ratio with GDP per capita, then we realize that we are doing fine. Not very well, not very bad, fine. Comparable to similar countries. Okay, countries with similar GDP per capita, not overall GDP, GDP per capita. Well, India taxes okay. Countries which tax less than India when it comes to GDP per capita are Pakistan, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, like I've told you before, it doesn't tax its population because Saudi Arabian government earns a lot of money by selling oil. Okay, so they don't need to tax their population. That's why their population is economically very happy. Politically, we don't know, but economically, they are very happy. Any which way. So when it comes to GDP per capita, when we take this GDP per capita into account, then India is doing fine. Then let's talk about other factors, other charts. Okay, fourth chart. Tax on income versus taxes on goods and services. Okay, look, there are two types of taxes, direct and indirect. Okay, direct tax example is income tax. Indirect tax is levied on goods and services. Example is GST. So direct tax is levied on our income, indirect taxes are levied on goods and services. Now, it is said, and hear me out carefully, direct taxes are considered progressive. They are considered good. Indirect taxes are considered regressive. So if your total tax revenue, within your total tax revenue, progressive taxes have a higher share, then that's good. Okay, direct taxes have a higher share, that means your taxation system is more progressive. If within your overall tax revenue, indirect taxes have a higher share, then your taxation system is regressive. Generally, it is found that developed countries, Denmark, Sweden and all, UK, they are more progressive. That means they are more reliant on direct taxes. And underdeveloped countries, developing countries, these countries are more reliant on regressive taxes. Now, as far as this chart is concerned, India's data is not available with the World Bank and UN when it comes to this chart. But we know from Government of India's data that when it comes to total tax revenue, in India, 50% comes from direct taxes, 50% comes from indirect taxes. Okay, they are roundabout similar. So India is neither progressive completely nor regressive completely. So India is doing okay in that regard. Okay, and last, tax revenue versus electoral democracy. So they say that your tax revenue as a percentage of GDP is higher in cases of electoral democracy. That means if you are a better democracy, your tax revenue would be higher. Okay, when we factor this into account, we find yes, as compared to, as if we go by India's score in electoral democracy index, India earns a particular kind of tax revenue. Okay, countries with higher ranking in electoral democracy index earn higher tax revenue, Germany, Brazil and all. Okay, there are a few exceptions though. China, which has no democracy, but still it collects a lot of taxes. Saudi Arabia, sorry, not Saudi Arabia, other countries. There are some exceptions, but generally it is found out that countries who score higher on this electoral democracy index also collect more taxes. Now, if we analyze all these 5 charts, we realize that Indians are not overtaxed. Okay, we are not that overtaxed. We are not very undertaxed as well, but we are not overtaxed. We are somewhere in the middle. Therefore, there is scope for reduction in taxes to a little extent only. And therefore, we need to find other ways to fire up our consumer spending. That's all. That's all that we need to know as far as this news item is concerned. Okay, simple? All right. Now let's quickly jump to topic number 3, which is sovereign gold bonds. Okay. Now, why is this in the news? Sovereign gold bonds. The thing is that this scheme, sovereign gold bonds, was launched in 2015 rather. And now in 2025, government has decided to discontinue with this scheme. Now, the thing is, why did the government decide to launch this scheme in 2015 in the first place? Okay. The thing is that we as Indians are a very gold hungry nation. Okay. We love consuming gold. We consume a lot of gold. Indians consume a lot of gold as compared to other countries of the world. As compared to other countries of the world, Indians rank really high when it comes to gold consumption. We consume a lot of gold. Okay. The problem is that we do not produce enough gold. Produce that much gold. That is a very big problem. Huge problem, actually. Okay. So, if we are consuming very high levels of gold, or not high levels, high amounts of gold, we are not producing that much gold, where will this demand for gold going to get from? Well, this demand will be fulfilled through imports because Indians don't stop consuming gold at all. Okay, so where will this gold come from? Imports. Now in 2014-15, government of India realized that Indians import a lot of gold. We import a lot of gold. And because of that, our import bill skyrocketed. Our import bill was very high, partly because of very high levels of gold imports. Okay, so our gold import was very high, overall import bill was very high. Now, the problem with high import bill is that when your imports increase, well, there is an outflow of money from your economy. That is one problem. Because when you import something from abroad and you give money in return, right? So goods are coming into your country, but money is getting out of your country. So there is net outflow of wealth from your country. That is one concern of high imports. The other thing is when your imports increase, your currency starts to depreciate vis-a-vis dollar. So rupee started depreciating vis-a-vis dollar. Okay, so government thought that we have to reduce these imports somehow, and first let's target gold. Okay, so first of all, government increased custom duty on gold, taxes on gold imports. Okay, so now you have to pay way more to import gold from abroad. But that didn't stop Indians from buying gold from abroad. Like I said, we are crazily hungry for gold. Okay, so even after increase in custom duty or increase in taxes on gold imports, our consumption levels didn't decline. Okay, now government decided that we have to do something. So government said, okay, there are two purposes for which we buy gold. One is for jewelry purposes. We love gold jewelry. The other is for investment purposes. Some people buy gold for investment purposes, right? Because they think in future the price of gold is going to increase. So we are going to park our wealth in gold. So there are two reasons for buying gold: jewelry, festivals, marriages and all that, and investment. Now government says that we have an idea for this investment part, and that is sovereign gold bond scheme. Now, what is this scheme? Let's find out. Okay, so sovereign gold bond scheme. Now government says that all those people who want to buy gold for investment purposes, well, we have an idea. You don't have to import physical gold, yet you can invest your money in gold. What did the government say? Government say that instead of buying physical gold, you can buy paper gold. Okay, government created a piece of paper. Okay, on that piece of paper, let's suppose this piece of paper, on that piece of paper, it was written 1 gram. Okay, now government says that anyone who wants to invest in gold can buy this piece of paper. Okay, the price of this piece of paper will be equal to the price of 1 gram of gold. Simple. Okay, so instead of buying actual gold, you can buy this paper gold. The price will be 1 gram of gold. If in future the price of gold increases, actual gold increases, the price of this piece of paper will also increase, so that in future you can sell this piece of paper for the new price of gold. You are buying it for investment purposes, so why do you need to buy actual physical gold? You can buy this piece of paper. Okay, now you might say that what guarantee do I have that this piece of paper is valuable? Okay, What guarantee do I have that I can sell this piece of paper in future for the new price of gold? Well, government says we take guarantee, and that is known as sovereign guarantee. Now, if government takes guarantee, that is as authoritative as anything. So government gives guarantee of this piece of paper. Okay. Plus, to attract more investors, government says that look, if you buy physical gold, you won't gain anything out of it. But if you buy this paper gold, we will give you 2.5% interest on the amount you have invested per year. So it is a better option. How? Well, it is like buying physical gold, plus you earn 2.5 interest per annum, plus you can sell it anytime at the new price of gold. So rather than buying physical gold, buy this. Now through this, what was government targeting? Government was targeting those investors who want to invest in gold, but government was telling them that instead of buying physical gold, buy this piece of paper. Okay. Now, more and more people started buying this piece of paper. Okay, government conducted auctions. Okay, so more and more people started buying these pieces of paper. Gold imports declined. Government's import bill declined. That was the whole purpose, right? Now, this piece of paper is known as sovereign gold bond. Right? And it is denominated in 1 gram, 2 gram, 3 gram, multiples of 1 gram of gold. The price of the bond will be on the multiples of grams of gold. The price of the bond will be equal to the price of gold. Okay, this was sovereign gold bond scheme. Clear? So let's talk about some of its features. So sovereign gold bonds were government securities denominated in grams of gold. The scheme was started in 2000. Now these sovereign gold bonds are issued by RBI. Okay, on behalf of government. That means they are issued by RBI, but the money goes to government. Okay, so government RBI issues this on behalf of government of India. Okay, minimum investment is 1 gram. Maximum investment is you can buy 4 kg gold worth of sovereign gold bond. Okay, so minimum investment is 1 gram of gold. Maximum is price of 4 kg of gold. Okay. Now the total tenure of this piece of paper is 8 years. But you have an option of exiting at 5th year, 6th year, 7th year. So you can go back to the government at 5th year and tell them that take this piece of paper and give me the current price of gold back. The government will do it. Okay. But now you will say that what if I want to sell this piece of paper? What if I want my money back just after 2 years? Then after 2 years, you can sell this piece of paper to some third person. Okay. But if you want this money back from government, then you can get it at 5th, 6th and 7th year. Clear? Plus, you will get the market value of gold at the time of redemption. So whatever the price of gold will be in future in the market, you'll get that price. So it's as good as buying physical gold. Okay. Plus, you will get a 2.5% interest rate. Plus, these sovereign gold bonds are tradable in the stock market. So if you want to sell after 1 year, you can do it. Okay. Plus, any income earned from these sovereign gold bonds are exempt from Income Tax Act, capital gain tax. So you get tax benefits also. Clear? Simple. So this was the benefit. Now, why has the government decided to discontinue with this? Okay. Well, here are a few reasons for that. The government says that the cost of these bonds is too much for us. The government is finding it expensive. Okay. Now that India's imports have stabilized, government thinks that now we can't continue with this scheme because this scheme was expensive for the government. Government had to pay you full price of gold. Plus, government had to pay you 2.5% interest rate per annum. So it was a really expensive scheme for the government, right? So government says that we launched this scheme not for any welfare. We launched this scheme for investors. This scheme was not for poverty alleviation, social sector spending. It was only for investors. So if this scheme is expensive for us, it is costing us money and it is doing no welfare, then why are we continuing with this scheme? So government said that this is our expenditure on this scheme is too high. Plus, this scheme is not doing any welfare for the poor people. So let's discontinue the scheme. And then let's encourage people to go back to buying physical gold if you want to invest in gold. If you really want to buy physical gold, you really want to invest in gold, then don't buy sovereign gold bonds. Go buy physical gold, import it. And if you really want to import it, we are also reducing taxes on import of golds, import and custom duty, so that more and more people import physical gold. Okay, so government is completely discontinuing this scheme, and for like financial reasons only. And government is now going back telling to people that go buy physical gold. We can't afford this scheme. Okay, that's it. That's all you need to know as far as sovereign gold bonds are concerned. Simple.